5 years ago, a virus crawled out of Wuhan, turned the world into a masked dystopia. And now, the New York Times, that bastion of liberal gospel, finally whispers what I've been screaming since 2020. COVID probably leaked from a lab. Oh boy, the liberals are finally getting permission to nod at what us conspiracy nuts saw coming from a mile away. The scared lemmings needed permission from the mothership to note what was obvious. I guess the memo finally cleared the editorial board's sanctimonious filter. Let's set the stage. Back in 2020, if you dared mutter lab leak, you were a tinfoil-hatted lunatic. The experts, Fauci and his clipboard cronies, swore on their mothers' graves it was bats and pangolins from the wet market.
Pushback.
What I do feel strongly about is that this was a spillover from an animal species to a human.
Strongly suggesting that, in fact, it was a natural occurrence.
Very strongly. Strongly indicating that it was a natural spillover.
Strongly points to this being a natural occurrence.
Pointing much more strongly
Pretty strong.
towards a natural occurrence. Very, very strongly. Strongly favors a natural occurrence.
A natural whoopsie-daisy. The wet market fairy tales flooded CNN, MSNBC, The Times. Every blue propaganda mill churned out the same exact script. But here's the kicker. They knew it could have come from that Wuhan laboratory that was set up right there where scientists were juicing up coronaviruses like some Frankenstein side hustle. And they lied straight to your face, mine, everyone's. Why? To cover their asses. Those grant-chasing, ego-stroking asses that greenlit this mess in the first place. Now, smash that like button if you're fed up with the lies, and subscribe if you're ready to fight back. We're not done yet exposing this circus. Now check out this gem, the latest New York Times opinion piece about the subject that's lighting up social media that a leftist friend of mine messaged me and had me read. Now, this is the part that really set me off. I'm quoting here. It's not hard to imagine how the attempt to squelch legitimate debate might have started. Some of the loudest proponents of the lab leak theory weren't just earnestly making inquiries. They were acting in terrible faith. For scientists and public health officials, circling the wagons and vilifying anyone who dared to dissent might have seemed like a reasonable defense strategy. Oh, bless their hearts. Even now, the leftist elites are clutching their pearls, protecting their initial freakout. We are a little bit uppity considering the fact that we don't have scientific degrees when we are pointing out the obvious. Now here's where it gets ugly. They didn't just lie, they weaponized the lie. Governors, tech overlords, and media lapdogs teamed up to shred our precious First Amendment like it was junk mail. YouTube channels nuked. I personally got several strikes. Twitter accounts vaporized. Say lab leak in 2020 and you were a digital pariah, a racist, as demonstrated by this New York Times tweet. Someday we will stop talking about the lab leak theory and maybe even admit its racist roots. But alas, that day is not yet here. That is a tweet from Apoorva Mendavili of the New York Times, their COVID writer who is still on the beat. Nothing wrong with that tweet, is there? Accusing anybody who's declaring that maybe it escaped from the Wuhan laboratory as opposed to their cultural norms of eating very exotic food for us, but we're the racists by stating that it came from the lab. This is the New York Times for you. Meanwhile, the rest of us were canceled faster than Bill Cosby after his conviction of rape. I lost count of how many creators got the ban hammer for daring to question the narrative. The media didn't just push propaganda, they built a darn fortress around it, brandishing dissenters as dangerous misinformation. And now the Times, now they admit it was a cover-up. This, by the way, is after the German government was told by its intelligence services that it was an 80 to 90% probability that it escaped from the laboratory. This was the initial thought of everybody who knew about it. And what should happen, these clowns should be in jail. Every suit who signed off on that censorship, every bureaucrat who locked us down while hiding the truth, it wasn't a mistake. It was a conspiracy to gag us. Why should we ever trust them again? These are the same geniuses who told you masks were useless, then mandatory, and would have the police arrest you for not wearing one, or turn a plane around for removing a face diaper off of a 3-year-old who was crying over the stupidity and inhumanity of it, and boot them off the plane. This is the madness that we were under. Meanwhile, they mandated you take a vaccine they knew for quite a while didn't work as promised. It was free, of course. I mean, your tax dollars went into the pockets of Pfizer's.
Brought to you by Pfizer.
Brought to you by Pfizer. Brought to you by Pfizer.
And of course, the same demonizing they did of wet market origin skeptics, they went even harder on actual medical doctors who proposed the possibility that ivermectin or hydrochloroquine might be useful as antivirals in terms of a treatment. Why did they do this? Because otherwise they wouldn't have gotten the Emergency Authorization Act passed that would enable them to dole out this quote-unquote vaccine that hadn't been properly tested according to FDA standards.
Do I have to sue CNN?
I don't know, do you?
They're making shit up. They keep saying I'm taking horse dewormer. I literally got it from a doctor. It's an American company.
Mm-hmm.
They won the Nobel Prize in 2015 for use in human beings.
Yeah.
And CNN is saying I'm taking horse dewormer I don't know. But what they didn't highlight is that I got better.
Yeah, you got better quickly.
They try to make it seem as if like I'm doing some wacky shit that's completely ineffective. And
right.
CNN was saying that I'm a distributor of misinformation. What's crazy is look how better I got.
Yeah.
I got better pretty quick, bitch.
Let's go.
To back this, the California legislature passed a bill, AB 2098, which would put your medical license at great risk, which of course you worked your whole life to attain, which you are likely still in debt for, merely for deviating from the medical orthodoxy. A direct violation not only of our First Amendment, which I hold more sacred than the Ten Commandments, but the precepts of science, common sense, and decency. Doctors got hauled in front of medical boards and were coerced by the heavy hand of the totalitarian system into silence. Meanwhile, it was your tax dollars that poured into Pfizer coffers for that god-awful vaccine. And meanwhile, they had the establishment, the government, prosecute doctors who spoke out and made life hell for dissenters who stated anything different than what the medical establishment was forcing down our throats. My friends, that is fascism, the definition, the merger of corporation and state to do what each individually could not. And even this Time opinion piece lays it bare. Scientists hushed this up to protect legitimate, beneficial science. Translation? Their cushy grants and reputations. They torched your rights, tanked your businesses. Remember when Walmart was able to stay open, but your local mom and pop shop had to close down and destroyed many family businesses that had taken years to progress to the level that they were? They kept you from grandma's funeral to save their own skins. And now they're like, oops, our bad. Nah, too late. You don't get a mulligan after that level of betrayal. So here's the score. COVID was a lab leak. They lied about it, and they're still patting themselves on the back for defending science. Me, I'm done with their excuses. I am for one thing, and that is truth, for freedom, for a government that doesn't treat us like lab rats in their screwed up experiment. These elitist clowns want forgiveness without accountability. No, thank you. Fat chance. So go on, keep smirking, you hacks. It won't erase the canceled account, the lost years, the tears, the learning loss of children who were forced to stay home from school, those who can't recognize facial patterns because of all the masking that you enforced, the division that you created amongst our nation with your lies, with the only people that benefited from masks were those who were ugly. And now, today, 5 years after, those of us with common sense, you want to own up to the lies that you propagated, claiming you were misled, and go on having the public believe you. And now that you're in the vice grip of the boa constrictor of truth, the stranglehold that it has, and you're trying to wriggle around, trying to maintain that monthly credit card payment from your zombified NPC patrons, those that still believe that they're smarter than all of us conspiracy theorists who saw the obvious years ahead of you and them because they can afford a subscription to the elitist New York Times. Why don't you and all of the rest of the so-called media elites who are pretending to come clean after acting as state media for the real fascists, defined once again as the merger of corporation and state? My sincere suggestion is the uniform renaming of all of your corporate rags and TV station with a name that is synonymous with your true intentions, that matches that grand old Soviet media stalwart. Pravda.